Good afternoon. It's 4:30 and I'm going to go on with my reading. Today I'm reading from the Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Dr. Edward F. Edinger. Dr. Edinger was the leading Jungian analyst of the 20th century, late 20th century, and he was a founder of the C.G. Jung Institute in New York City, along with oh, isn't that funny? It'll come to me. Anyway, her name skips my mind, but her book is called Psychic Energy. So look that up on YouTube and you'll know who it is. Sorry, there are some concessions we have to make to age. I apologize for that. Okay, so today, the Bible and the Psyche by Edward F. Edinger, Chapter 10, Solomon. Solomon, the son of David and Bathsheba, succeeded David to the throne as the last king of the United Monarchy. He is thus the third and final term in the sequence: Saul, David, Solomon. Symbolically, a temporal sequence of three refers to the opposites and their resolution: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. The 40-year reign of Solomon in all his glory is the fulfillment of the United Monarchy. He has become a legendary figure characterized chiefly by his wealth and his wisdom, the temple and palace he built, and by his relations with the Queen of Sheba. He is also traditionally assigned the authorship of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. The Song of Songs. Solomon's outstanding quality of wisdom is established at the beginning of the biblical account with a description of his dream. Quote, At Gibeon, Yahweh appeared in a dream to Solomon during the night. God said, quote, Ask what you would like me to give you, unquote. Solomon replied, Give your servant a heart to understand how to discern between good and evil. For who could govern his people? For who could govern this people of yours that is so great? It pleased Yahweh that Solomon should have asked for this. Since you have asked for this, Yahweh said, and not asked for a long life for yourself or riches or the lives of your enemies, but have asked for a discerning judgment for yourself, here and now I do what you ask. I give you a heart wise and shrewd as none before you has had and none will have after you. What you have not asked, I shall give you too, such riches and glory as no other king ever had. 1 Kings 3, 5 through 13. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'll come back to the chats a little bit later. Solomon is an embodiment of the wisdom archetype, and all his major attributes belong to its symbolism. Temple, palace, wealth, glory, and the Queen of Sheba are all aspects of this archetype. Quote, Yahweh gave Solomon immense wisdom and understanding and a heart as vast as the sand on the seashore. He could talk about plants from the cedar in Lebanon to the hyssop growing on the wall, and he could talk of animals and birds and reptiles and fish. 1 Kings 5, 9 and following. In legend, this passage is interpreted to mean that Solomon could speak to plants, animals, birds, and reptiles. That is, that like St. Francis, he was in communication with the natural levels of the psyche. His connection with natural instinct is illustrated by his well-known response to the two women claiming the same child, 1 Kings 3:16 and following. Another example comes from legend. Quote, one of the puzzles that Solomon was set to solve was how to distinguish between a bunch of natural and a bunch of artificial flowers without leaving his seat to examine them. The king ordered the windows of the room to be opened, and the bees coming in alighted on the former and ignored the latter. Unquote. Solomon's temple and palace can be considered symbolic synonyms for wisdom. The Aurora Consurgent speaks of the treasure house, which wisdom built upon a rock. Quote, wisdom hath built herself a house, which if any man entered in, he shall be saved and find pastures, as the prophet beareth witness. They shall be inebriated with the plenty of thy house. Psalm 35:9. For better is one day in thy courts than thousands. Psalm 83:11. How blessed are they that dwell in this house. Psalm 83:5. The beauty of this house cannot be told. Its walls and streets are on the purest gold, and its gates gleam with pearls and precious stones. Revelation 12:10 and following. And its cornerstones are 14, containing the principal virtues of the whole foundation. In alchemy, the treasure house of philosophy is a synonym for the aurum philosophorum, or lapis. Zosimus describes the lapis as a shining white temple of marble. Solomon's function as builder expresses the constructive nature of wisdom, that is, of consciousness based on the self. The Aurora says of wisdom, quote, naught is more precious in nature than she, and God also hath not appointed her to be bought for a price. She it is that Solomon chose to have instead of light, and above all beauty and health. Her fruit is more precious than all the riches of this world, and all the things that are desired are not to be compared with her. She is a tree of life to them that lay hold on her, and she is a tree of life to them who lay. She is a tree of life to them that lay hold on her, and an unfailing light. Blessed shall they be who retain her, for the science of God shall never perish. He who hath found this science, it shall be his rightful food forever. Unquote. According to legend, Solomon's building operations were made possible by a miraculous creature called the Shomir. Quote, according to some sages, the Shomir was a worm the size of a grain of wheat that had the power to hew down trees and split mountains into slabs of stone. These sages said that the Shomir was kept in wool in the Garden of Eden until Solomon was ready to build the house of God. Then an eagle was sent to carry it to the builders. Other sages claim that the Shomir was a blue stone, the size of a small jewel, and wherever it was placed and the ineffable name whispered, the rock beneath would break into the desired shape and size. But the hiding place of the Shomir no one knew, excepting Asmodeus, king of demons, who lived in the mountains of darkness. unquote. By trickery, the secret was extracted from Asmodeus, and the shomer was obtained to build the temple. On completion, the shomer was given back to the keeper of the abyss, who buried it in the bottomless sea, and from there no one can obtain it excepting the Creator himself. The shomer association to Solomon indicates that it belongs to the symbolism of wisdom. Its ability to split and shape undifferentiated matter gives it a blade-like quality and connects it with the separatio powers of the Logos. As a worm, it is the lowest of primordial life. As a blue jewel, it is the highest celestial value. As a stone, it is analogous to the philosopher's stone, and like it is a union of opposites. And like it is a union of opposites. It initially resided in the Garden of Eden, that is, belonged to the primordial self. But after being used, it was returned to the abyss of the bottomless sea, the depths of the unconscious. The ability to cut and shape undifferentiated matter brings about psychic transformation. Unformed libido, bound to inorganic or vegetative matter, stone, and wood, is released and made available to the cultural psyche. This theme appears, for instance, in dreams of felled trees, which often refer to the dissolution of a relationship involving unconscious identification, freeing libido for more differentiated functioning. Okay, so that's the end of Solomon. The next is Queen of Sheba. I just want to say hello to you. Okay. There's a request for connection on Instagram, which I will allow for the time being, as long as everybody stays friends. That's the point, isn't it? Okay, so I'm reading from the Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Edward F. Edinger. This section of chapter 10 is entitled The Queen of Sheba. A major symbolic event in the Solomon saga is his meeting with the Queen of Sheba. The canonical account is as follows, quote, "The fame of Solomon having reached the Queen of Sheba, she came to test him with difficult questions. She brought immense riches to Jerusalem with her, camels laden with spices, great quantities of gold, and precious stones. On coming to Solomon, she opened her mind freely to him, and Solomon had an answer for all her questions. Not one of them was too obscure for the king to expound. When the Queen of Sheba saw all the wisdom of Solomon, the palace he had built, the food at his table, the accommodation for his officials, the organization of his staff, and the way they were dressed, his cupbearers, and the holocausts he offered in the temple of Yahweh, it left her breathless, and she said to the king, What I heard in my own country about you and your wisdom was true then. Until I came and saw it with my own eyes, I could not believe what they told me. But clearly they told me less than half. For wisdom and prosperity you surpass the report I heard. Now happy your wives are. How happy are these servants of yours who wait on you always and hear your wisdom. Blessed be Yahweh, your God, who has granted you his favor, setting you on the throne of Israel. Because of Yahweh's everlasting love for Israel, he has made you king to deal out law and justice. And she presented the king with 120 talents of gold and great quantities of spices and precious stones. No such wealth of spices ever came again as those given to King Solomon by the Queen of Sheba. And King Solomon, in his turn, presented the Queen of Sheba with all she expressed a wish for, besides those presents he made her out of his royal bounty. Besides those presents he made her out of his roaring. Try it again. Besides those presents he made out of his royal bounty. Then she went home, she and her servants, to her own country. 1 Kings 10, 1 through 13. The biblical account has been richly amplified through the centuries by legend. For example, Ginsburg gives the following account, quote, "The Hopo had informed Solomon that he had found an unknown country, which is not subject to my lord the king. Its trees are from the beginning of all time, and they suck up water that flows from the Garden of Eden. The city is crowned with men. On their heads they wear garlands wreathed in paradise. They know not how to fight nor how to shoot with bow and arrow. Their ruler is a woman. She is called the Queen of Sheba. Solomon sends a letter to Sheba by the Hopo, requesting her to visit him and pay him homage, and in due time she arrives. Benaiah conducted the queen to Solomon, who had gone to sit in a house of glass to receive her. The queen was deceived by an illusion. She thought the king was sitting in water. As she stepped across to him, she raised her garment to keep it dry. On her bared feet the king noticed hair, and he said to her, 'Thy beauty is the beauty of a woman, but the hair is masculine. Hair is an ornament to a man, but it disfigures a woman.' Then the queen began and said, 'I have heard of thee and thy wisdom. If now I inquire of thee concerning a matter, wilt thou answer me?' He replied, 'The king giveth wisdom. Out of his mouth cometh knowledge and understanding.' She then said to him, 1. 7 there are that issue, and 9 that enter. 2 yield the draught, and 1 drinks. Said he to her, 7 are the days of a woman's defilement, and 9 the months of pregnancy. 2 are the breasts that yield the draught, and 1 the child that drinks it. Whereupon she said to him, 'Thou art wise.' 2. Then she questioned him further. A woman said to her son, 'Thy father is my father, and my grandfather my husband. Thou art my son, and I am thy sister.' Assuredly, said he, it was the daughter of Lot who spake thus to her son. 3. She placed a number of males and females of the same stature and garb before him and said, 'Distinguish between them.' Forthwith he made a sign to the eunuchs, who brought him a quantity of nuts and roasted ears of corn. The males, who were not bashful, seized them with bare hands. The females took them, putting forth their gloved hands from beneath their garments. Whereupon he exclaimed, 'Those are the males, these the females.' The riddles continued to a total of 22. We learn from the legend that the Queen of Sheba's realm is a part of the original paradise. That is, the anima resides in the original state of unconscious wholeness, the state of nature. Other legends describe the same fact negatively when they say that the Queen of Sheba inhabits a realm of demons. When the ego is identified with spirit, nature becomes demonic. Witness the fact that Pan and Dionysus were recast as versions of the devil by Christian mentality. In the biblical account, the Queen of Sheba comes to Solomon on her own initiative, indicating that the anima desires a connection with consciousness. Nature wants to be illuminated by spirit. In the legend, Solomon takes the initiative. He has an intuition, the hopo bird, that his dominion is not complete and his power motive is roused. The legend's account of the meeting is very interesting psychologically. Solomon received Sheba in a house of glass. As the queen stepped on the glass floor, thinking it water, she lifted her skirt and revealed a hairy foot. According to some versions, it was a goat's foot. Solomon's house of glass is connected symbolically with his traditional wisdom. Glass symbolizes consciousness. Its transparency and its mirror function represent the reflective capacity of self-knowledge as promoted by the transparent vision of the objective, abstract spirit. Sheba, subjected to the scrutiny of the spirit, reveals her unhumanized residue of nature, which indicates she is both part animal and part masculine. Nature's original state of the undifferentiated opposites still exists in her. In some versions, Sheba's encounter with Solomon transforms and humanizes her foot. Encounter with Solomon as the personification of spirit releases her from her androgynous and demonic residue. Sheba in turn exerts an effect on Solomon. In the biblical account, she came to test him with difficult questions. In the legend, this becomes a series of 22 riddles. The archetypal theme of trial by riddle is widespread. We have already noted this image in the story of Samson, Judges 14. James L. Kelso mentions other examples. Quote, there are modern Greek legends in which the failure to solve a riddle costs a man his life. A monster living in a castle propounds a riddle and gives 40 days for its solution. Unfortunate is the person who fails, for the monster devours him. The resemblance to the story of the Sphinx is evident. In the Mahabharata, the legend takes another form. The hero, Yudhishthira, frees two brothers from the fetters of a monster by the solution of a riddle. Teutonic legends are of a similar import. In the so-called Warburg Krieg, there is a deadly riddle contest between Odin and the giant Vathudnir. And another instance has been immortalized by Schiller, Turandot. Unquote. The outstanding example is the riddle of the Sphinx, which Oedipus was required to answer at the risk of his life. Oedipus's victory over Mother Nature was only apparent. She caught him from behind via his unconscious incest tendency. Jung writes, quote, Oedipus, thinking he had overcome the Sphinx, sent by the mother goddess merely because he had solved her childishly simple riddle, fell a victim to matriarchal incest. This had all those tragic consequences, which could easily have been avoided if only Oedipus had been sufficiently intimidated by the frightening appearance of the terrible or devouring mother whom the Sphinx personified. It is evident that a factor of such magnitude cannot be disposed of by solving a childish riddle. The riddle was, in fact, the trap which the Sphinx laid for the unwary wanderer. Overestimating his intellect in a typically masculine way, Oedipus walked right into it and all unknowingly committed the crime of incest. The riddle of the Sphinx was herself, the terrible mother imago, which Oedipus would not take as a warning, unquote. Solomon suffered a fate similar to that of Oedipus, since the Bible tells us, quote, when Solomon grew old, his wives swayed his heart to other gods, and his heart was not holy with Yahweh, his God. So Solomon became the follower of Astarte. 1 Kings 11, 4 through 5. In other words, Solomon lost his commitment to the masculine spirit principle and regressed to matriarchal nature psychology. The Old Testament pictures an early stage of psychological development in which the contrast between the masculine and feminine principles is highly polarized, and where an either or psychology prevails. However, the underlying symbolism of the Solomon Sheba story, especially as it is established in legend, points ahead to the ultimate conjunctio of co-equal principles. The encounter between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, like the encounter between Oedipus and the Sphinx, represents a meeting of nature and spirit. For Solomon, it is an ordeal to test and purify the capacity for discriminating consciousness. For Sheba, it is the opportunity for the humanization and redemption of her bestial and demon residue. In a woman's psychology, this means the humanization of the feminine principle through a conscious relationship to the animus. Rivka Kluger puts it well, quote, if a woman is freed from the animus possession by uniting as a woman with the animus instead of being him, i.e., by relating with her feminine feeling to the spirit, she becomes both consciously masculine by accepting and developing her masculinity, and at the same time more feminine because the accepted animus does not sit anymore on her femininity, twisting and destroying it. In our day, because of the obvious shadow side of patriarchal thinking, there is a tendency to depreciate patriarchy and idealize matriarchy. But it should not be forgotten that the shadow side of matriarchal origins is chaos, an undifferentiated swamp which yearns for redemption, an eternal cycle of recurring death and birth, out of which no development could have come without the new principle of spirit breaking through. The desirable goal, as it appears in myths and legends, as well as in dreams, is not a mother world in contrast to the father world, but the conjunctio of feminine and masculine. Conjunctio means conjunction. I'll leave it to your imagination. Unquote. In a man's psychology, the transformation of the Queen of Sheba refers to the humanization of his primitive nature anima. Because of the fluid nature of unconscious imagery, the Queen of Sheba is at one time the content in need of transformation, and at another time the agent of transformation. On the one hand, she comes to Solomon to be affected by his wisdom. On the other hand, she personifies wisdom herself. She evokes Solomon's wisdom by her riddles and also brings him the wisdom that enables him to answer. For wisdom is the solver of riddles, as Wisdom 8:8 tells us. Quote, she knows the past, she forecasts the future. She knows how to turn maxims and solve riddles. She has foreknowledge of signs and wonders, of the unfolding of the ages and the times. Unquote. Matthew 12:42 links the meeting of Solomon and Sheba with the Last Judgment. On Judgment Day, the Queen of Sheba will rise up with this generation and condemn it, because she came from the ends of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon, and there is something greater than Solomon here. The figure of the Queen of Sheba was used by the Church Fathers, Von Franz writes. Okay, I'm once again having my favorite hypnosis attack, but going on, there's only one page and one paragraph left, so I will go on. Quote, the patristic literature, the Queen of Sheba was a prefiguration of Mary. On the other hand, in the hermeneutics of the Church Fathers, the Queen of Sheba was also an image for the Church as the queen and concubine of Christ, who was called the King of the South. Indeed, this feminine figure was even identified with God himself, who shall go with the whirlwinds of the south. The south winds is also a symbol of the Holy Spirit, causing the minds of the elect to seethe, that they may bring about whatsoever good things they desire. The equation of the Holy Spirit with the south wind is presumably due, as Jung points out, to the hot and dry quality of the wind. The Holy Spirit is fiery and causes exaltation. He warms all things with the fire of love. According to Gregory the Great, the south signifies those unfathomed depths of the heavenly country, which are filled with the heat of the Holy Spirit. Quote, just a minute. The biblical account of the encounter between Solomon and Sheba hints at a conjunctio between nature and spirit, but it is not fulfilled. The story ends with Sheba returning to her own country. As Kluger puts it, there is only a promise for the healing of the breach. It was the privilege of a much later time to produce the spiritual blossom of the conjunctio between the Queen of Sheba and King Solomon in its deepest form, namely in alchemy. The alchemists used the figures of Solomon and Sheba as personifications of the opposites, which are to be united in the alchemical transformation process. For instance, a text says, quote, you have the virgin earth, give her a husband who is fitting for her. She is the Queen of Sheba, hence there is need of a king crowned with a diadem. Where shall we find him? We see now the heavenly Son gives to his splendor to all. We see now the heavenly Son gives of his splendor to all other bodies, and the earthly or mineral Son will be likewise when he is set on his own heaven, which is named after the Queen of Sheba. So too, our Mercury has left his own lands and clothed himself with the fairest garment of white, and has given himself to Solomon, and not to any other who is a stranger, extraneous, and impure. Unquote. That is from Mysterium Conjunctionis, Collected Works 14, paragraph 533. The text concerns the conjunctio of Sol and Luna, expressed in this case as a union between the Sun, King Solomon, and its containing mercurial heaven, the Queen of Sheba. Sheba is thus the medium within which the son of King Solomon can shine. This medium has the nature of Mercurius, that paradoxical being whose one definable meaning is the unconscious. As Jung tells us, the union of opposites is a transcendental process, is a transconscious process, and in principle, not amenable to psychic explanation. I'm sorry. And in principle, not amenable to scientific explanation. However, it can be suggested by a symbolic image such as the meeting of Solomon and Sheba. The Rosarium reports King Solomon as saying, "This is my daughter, for whose sake men say that the Queen of the South came out of the East, like the rising dawn, in order to hear, understand, and behold the wisdom of Solomon." Jung remarks, "The Queen of Sheba, wisdom, the royal art, and the daughter of the philosophers are all so interfused that the underlying psychology clearly emerges. The art is queen of the alchemist's heart. She is at once his mother, his daughter, and his beloved, and in his art and its allegories, the drama of his own soul has individuation process is played out." Unquote. The conjunctio, which is only hinted at in the story of Solomon and Sheba, receives its full biblical expression later in the Song of Songs. Okay, so that is the end of that chapter. I have been reading from The Bible and the Psyche, Individuation, Symbolism in the Old Testament by Edward F. Edinger. I'll now look at your comments. Tomorrow we will be talking about prophets and kings, and that's prophets with an ETS, not an ITS. Colleen Sickle is here. Hello. Bellis, I'm not going to read your comments that don't relate to this reading. Welcome to tomorrow. I'm good. It's good to see you. I hope everything is under control where you live, and that mental health professionals are not quite so inundated as our other medical professionals. It so happens that a few of my friends, are creating something to hopefully take some of the pressure off mental health professionals, particularly in this time of great angst. So I'm in the process of creating a web page, which I will give you a link to. And we would love it if we could find some mental health professionals who would agree to also be on this website. And you can see how it works in that page. I'm still building it. I've spent all yesterday and today building it. So there will be other people involved in it. But at least you can see what we're working toward, which is for non mental health professionals, but people with experience with trauma and with various aspects of the psyche, who can offer some sort of mentoring to other individuals. And so I'd ask you to take a look. There's a link for mentoring for men and mentoring for women. If you look at mentoring for men, you will see Vincent Kennedy, who's offered to work on this. And there's 3 layers. There's the landing page, which I provided here, and then there's a page that has a list of individuals, and then there's a third layer that has an individual page for each person. And so you can write to me privately if you, whether or not you think it's appropriate for us to be doing this, but anyway, we're doing it in the great spirit of John le Carré, the novelist, who wrote in Honorable Schoolboy, act first and apologize later, because if you don't, you'll have to get London's permission to change your nappies. So we're not waiting for permission. We are forging ahead. And I hope that we can find some mental health professionals who will collaborate with us and who will be listed on a separate page that includes mental health professionals. So you can get a sense of it from the link that I just provided. And it's ironic that this whole reading today was about wisdom, because that's what I've been working on. So there's a synchronicity for you. Tamara says, many amazing new things coming in this time. I'll take a look. And so vital here for men right now as the yang yin rotation comes. Yes, it's definitely coming. And people who have been screaming about socialism for the last 50 years, all of a sudden they're all socialists. So, you know, so our president is having to basically socialize the American culture, at least temporarily, and that's an amazing thing to see. We need those who can understand the wider lens and archetypal energies playing out. It is so fierce now. Yes, it certainly is. And I think that we're only on the cusp of a psychic epidemic that is going to be global in its proportions. And there are going to be many people who need somebody experienced to talk to. Maybe they don't rise to the level of people who need a mental health professional, but they rise to the level of people who might need somebody to talk to. So that's what the idea of this. But anyway, that's the reading for today. And tomorrow we will be reading chapter 11, Prophets and Kings. And so I will see you all then. Thank you for joining me today.